My son placed my suitcase beside the bed in that nursing home room, like he was dropping off old furniture he didn't want anymore. "Mom, this is the best place for you now," Ethan said, without looking me in the eyes. His wife Vanessa stood behind him, pretending to wipe away tears, but I caught her smiling when she thought I wasn't watching. At that moment, I realized they hadn't brought me there out of love. They brought me there because they thought I was standing between them and everything I owned. Before Ethan walked out, I looked at him and quietly said, "3 days from now, you'll understand what you just did to me." 3 days later, my son lost everything. If this story already touched your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe. And tell me honestly, what would you do if your own child betrayed you like this? I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read every comment, and hearing your stories reminds me none of us are truly alone. The morning my son took me away from my home began like any other quiet Tuesday in late October. I woke up before sunrise the same way I had for most of my life. Old habits stay with you when you spend decades raising a family and helping run a business beside your husband. I made myself a cup of tea, wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders, and stood by the kitchen window watching the trees move in the cold Chicago wind. That house had been mine for 42 years. Richard and I bought it when Ethan was only 6 months old. Back then, the wallpaper peeled from the walls, the pipes rattled through winter nights, and we barely had enough money to fix the roof. But it became our home. Every inch of it carried memories. The mark near the pantry door from Ethan's toy truck. The backyard where Richard taught him baseball. The dining room where we celebrated every Christmas. After Richard died 3 years earlier, the house became quieter, but it still felt alive to me. It still felt like him. That morning, however, something felt wrong before Ethan even arrived. At exactly 8:15, I heard tires outside. I looked through the curtains and saw Ethan's black SUV parked in the driveway. Vanessa sat in the passenger seat staring down at her phone. Neither of them looked happy to be there. A strange heaviness settled in my chest. When Ethan walked through the front door, he forced a smile. "Morning, Mom." He kissed the top of my head quickly, distractedly, like he was already late for something more important. Vanessa entered behind him carrying a cardboard tray of coffees. "I brought your favorite," she said sweetly. "Vanilla latte." I almost laughed. Vanessa had never remembered my favorite coffee a single day in the 12 years she'd been married to my son. I thanked her anyway. Ethan loosened his tie and paced near the kitchen island. He wouldn't sit down, wouldn't look directly at me. That was when I noticed the suitcase, my suitcase, standing near the front door. Packed. My stomach tightened instantly. "What's that?" I asked quietly. Ethan finally stopped pacing. "Mom, we need to talk. Those words never lead anywhere good." Vanessa sat beside me and touched my hand gently. "We've been worried about you," she said. "Living alone at your age just isn't safe anymore." I slowly pulled my hand away. "I've managed just fine." Ethan sighed heavily, already irritated. "Mom, last month you left the stove on. I turned the burner off after 5 minutes. You forgot." "No," I answered calmly. I remembered. Silence filled the kitchen. Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with Ethan. That glance told me more than either of them had said so far. This conversation had been rehearsed, prepared, planned. Ethan rubbed his forehead dramatically. "Look, Mom, we found a beautiful place for you. It's comfortable, professional, and honestly, it's the best option right now." My fingers tightened around my coffee cup. "A nursing home." "It's assisted living," Vanessa corrected quickly, smiling too hard. The room suddenly felt colder. I looked from my son to the suitcase near the door. You already packed my things. Ethan exhaled sharply. We didn't want to upset you. Upset me. As though removing me from my own home was a small inconvenience. I stood slowly from the table. Who said I'm going anywhere? Vanessa's expression changed for half a second. Just a flicker. Annoyance beneath the fake kindness. Then she softened her face again. Layla, we're only trying to help. I ignored her and looked directly at my son. Did you already sign papers? Ethan hesitated. That hesitation answered me. Something inside me cracked quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for me to realize the son I raised was no longer the man standing in front of me. I'm not incapable, I said carefully. No one said you were, but you packed my clothes before even asking me. Ethan finally lost a little patience. Mom, why are you making this harder than it needs to be? There it was. Not concern, not sadness. Frustration, like I was an obstacle standing in the way of something he wanted. I studied my son's face carefully then. The dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the constant checking of his phone. Something else was happening. Something bigger. Vanessa stood and walked casually toward the living room while Ethan kept talking. But I noticed what she was really doing. Looking around the house, examining it. The fireplace, the antique cabinet, the staircase, like she was mentally redecorating rooms that already belonged to her. A memory surfaced suddenly. 2 years before he died, Richard had stood in this same kitchen late one night. Promised me something he told me quietly. I laughed at the seriousness in his voice. What if anything ever happens to me? Don't hand everything over too quickly. I frowned. What are you talking about? Richard looked toward the living room where Ethan had been bragging about another risky business investment. Our son thinks money fixes fear, he said softly. That scares me. At the time, I defended Ethan immediately. He's ambitious, Richard. No, my husband answered sadly. He's desperate to prove something. I remember being angry with Richard for saying that. Now standing in my kitchen years later, I realized my husband had seen something I refused to see. Ethan stepped closer. The place is already expecting you today. Today. Not next week. Not after discussion. Today. You arranged this behind my back? I whispered. We arranged it because we care about you. Vanessa interrupted quickly. I looked directly at her. Then why do you look relieved? Her face froze instantly. Only for a second. But I saw it. Ethan grabbed the suitcase. Mom, please don't do this. Do what create drama. Drama. I almost smiled at that word. After 42 years of sacrificing for my family, I had become drama. I looked around my kitchen slowly. The yellow curtains I picked with Richard in 1989. The old wooden clock Ethan made for me in middle school. The family photos lining the walls. And suddenly, I understood something horrifying. They didn't think I would fight back. They thought grief had made me weak. That age had made me confused. That loneliness had made me dependent. But they forgot something important. Before I was Ethan's mother, I was Richard Thompson's business partner. And Richard never trusted contracts he didn't read twice. I took one last sip of my cold coffee and quietly picked up my purse. Ethan looked relieved immediately. Vanessa smiled too quickly. Neither of them noticed the way I carefully slipped my reading glasses into my coat pocket. Neither of them realized I had already started paying attention, and neither of them understood that the moment they packed my suitcase, They started a war they were not prepared to lose. The drive to the nursing home lasted 43 minutes. I counted every single one. Ethan drove in silence, gripping the steering wheel tightly while Vanessa scrolled through her phone beside him. Occasionally, she would glance back at me with that same rehearsed expression of concern she'd worn all morning. I sat quietly in the back seat, with my purse resting on my lap. Outside the window, Chicago blurred past in gray autumn colors. Restaurants, gas stations, families walking together on sidewalks, ordinary life continuing while mine quietly collapsed. At least that was what Ethan thought. About 20 minutes into the drive, Ethan suddenly cleared his throat. "Oh, there are a few papers we still need signed," he said casually. Vanessa immediately reached into her oversized designer bag and pulled out a thick folder. Too quickly, too prepared. My pulse slowed instead of quickened. That was something Richard taught me years ago during difficult business negotiations. When people rush paperwork, he used to say, it's because they're afraid you'll actually read it. Vanessa twisted in her seat and handed me the folder with a smile. "Nothing complicated," she said. "Just medical authorization forms and residency paperwork." I accepted the folder slowly. The moment I opened it, I knew they were lying. The first few pages looked ordinary enough. Emergency contacts, medication authorization, insurance information. Then I reached page 6, Durable Financial Power of Attorney. My eyes lingered on the title for only half a second before I carefully turned the page as though I hadn't noticed. Ethan kept watching the road, too carefully, like a man pretending not to watch. I continued reading. Temporary property management authorization, asset access permissions, supplemental trust review rights. Interesting. Very interesting. I adjusted my glasses slowly. "You didn't mention financial paperwork." Ethan's shoulders stiffened instantly. "It's standard." "No," I replied calmly. "It isn't." Vanessa jumped in immediately. "It's only in case we need to help manage things while you settle in." "Manage what things?" The house Ethan answered quickly. "Bills, utilities, maintenance." I looked down at the paperwork again. This wasn't about paying electric bills. This was about control. Legal control. I could almost hear Richard's voice in my head. Read every line twice. I continued flipping through pages carefully while pretending my hands shook more than they actually did. That part wasn't difficult. Age gives people the advantage of underestimation. Ethan glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Mom, we're almost there. We just need signatures." I smiled faintly. "And I just need time to read." His jaw tightened. That tiny reaction told me everything. He needed these signed quickly. Why I reached another document and nearly laughed aloud. Irrevocable access authorization request, buried beneath medical language and administrative terminology, was a request allowing Ethan to review trust-held assets connected to my estate. My estate. Not his. Mine. I remembered the night Richard finalized the trust, almost 15 years earlier. We sat together in Michael Carter's office after business hours. Rain hammered the windows while stacks of legal documents covered the conference table. Richard looked unusually serious that night. "This protects you," he told me. I frowned. "From what?" "From pressure," he answered carefully. "Pressure from who?" He didn't answer immediately. Now I understood why. Back in the SUV, Vanessa turned around again. "Layla, do you need help understanding anything?" There was something almost insulting in the way she asked it. Like she'd already decided my age made me incapable. I looked directly into her eyes. "No," I said softly. "I understand perfectly." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan laughed nervously. "Mom's always been stubborn about paperwork. I almost corrected him. Not stubborn, careful. There's a difference. I continued reading slowly, deliberately. Every few minutes, Ethan checked the clock on the dashboard. His impatience grew heavier inside the car. Finally, he exhaled sharply. Mom, this really doesn't have to become a whole thing. A whole thing? Interesting phrase. As though protecting my own assets was some emotional inconvenience. I turned another page. There it was, a section already partially highlighted in yellow. Someone had literally highlighted where they wanted me to sign. My stomach twisted. Not because I was confused, because I suddenly realized how long they must have planned this. Vanessa leaned back again. We were up late organizing all this, she said. We're just trying to make things easier for everyone. Everyone. Not you. Everyone, meaning themselves. I closed the folder gently. How long have you been planning this silence? Ethan kept driving. Vanessa looked away first. That was answer enough. I reopened the folder and slowly removed a pen from my purse. Immediately, the tension inside the SUV shifted. Relief. Both of them relaxed too quickly. That told me they thought they were winning. I signed the basic medical pages first. Emergency treatment authorization, medication approval, facility policies. Then I reached the financial documents again. I paused deliberately. Ethan's eyes flickered to the mirror. Everything okay? Of course, I answered. I carefully turned several pages together and signed only the bottom document in the stack. A harmless intake acknowledgement, not the financial authorization hidden beneath it. Then I repeated the process again. Page after page, I gave them enough signatures to keep them comfortable, but not the ones they truly wanted. And while Vanessa talked distractedly about the activities offered at Silver Pines, I quietly slipped several important pages beneath the folded cardigan inside my purse. Years ago, Richard once told me something after a disastrous meeting with dishonest investors. People reveal themselves when they think you're vulnerable. At the time, I thought he meant business. Now I realized he also meant family. Ethan suddenly smiled for the first time all day. See, that wasn't so bad. I looked at my son carefully. The little boy who once cried because he accidentally stepped on a bird in our backyard. The teenager who begged me for advice before every school dance. The young man who held my hand at Richard's funeral while I fell apart. Where had that version of him gone? Or maybe this version had always been there underneath. Maybe ambition slowly replaced empathy, one compromise at a time. Vanessa adjusted her wedding ring nervously. When we get you settled, she said lightly, you'll see this was the right decision. I stared out the window again. The city disappeared behind us as the nursing home came into view ahead. Silver Pines assisted living, large brick building, perfect landscaping, expensive enough to look respectable. A beautiful place to quietly disappear. Ethan parked the SUV and immediately reached for the paperwork folder. I handed it over calmly. Too calmly. He didn't notice several pages were missing. Neither did Vanessa. That was their second mistake. Their first mistake was believing I was powerless. Their second was assuming I would stop paying attention. As Ethan stepped out to unload my suitcase, I looked down at the documents hidden inside my purse. Durable financial power of attorney, trust asset review authorization, property access permissions, evidence. And for the first time that day, I stopped feeling helpless. Because whatever game my son was playing, I had finally seen the board. Silver Pines Assisted Living looked more like a luxury hotel than a nursing home. That was probably intentional. The building stood behind perfectly trimmed hedges and decorative iron gates. Soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers near the entrance, while smiling employees welcomed residents with rehearsed warmth. Everything about the place was designed to feel comforting. But comfort and captivity can sometimes wear the same clothes. Ethan unloaded my suitcase while Vanessa walked beside me toward the front doors. "You'll love it here," she said brightly. "They have yoga classes, movie nights, even wine tastings." I looked at her quietly. She sounded like she was advertising a cruise ship, not explaining why they were removing me from my own home. Inside the lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and lavender candles. Elderly residents sat in expensive armchairs watching television or staring silently through large windows. Some looked peaceful. Others looked forgotten. A young receptionist smiled at me. "Welcome to Silver Pines, Mrs. Thompson. Not welcome home." "Welcome, temporary, disposable." Ethan stepped forward quickly and handed over a folder. All her paperwork should already be completed. Already completed. Interesting choice of words again. The receptionist nodded politely. "Perfect. We've prepared room 214. Prepared." Everything had been arranged before they ever spoke to me about it. I signed only the absolutely necessary intake forms, while pretending not to notice Ethan's impatience growing beside me. Then a woman, wearing navy blue scrubs, approached us. She looked to be in her early 50s, with tired eyes and kind features. "Mrs. Thompson?" she asked gently. "I'm Grace Miller. I'll help get you settled." There was something sincere in her voice, not forced, not rehearsed. For the first time that day, I felt a small flicker of relief. Grace picked up one of my bags. "I've got this. Thank you," I said quietly. As we walked toward the elevators, Ethan stayed unusually close beside the receptionist's desk, reviewing paperwork. Too close. Watching. Listening. Vanessa leaned toward him and whispered something under her breath. I only caught the end of it. "Finally move forward." I turned my head slightly. Vanessa noticed immediately and straightened up with a fake smile. My chest tightened. Not because of surprise anymore. Because of confirmation. They truly believed removing me solved a problem in their lives. Inside the elevator, Grace smiled politely. "You can decorate your room however you'd like," she said. "A lot of residents bring family photos." Family photos. The words almost hurt. Room 214 sat at the end of a quiet hallway with pale cream walls and soft lighting. The room itself was clean and spacious enough. Small sofa, single bed, bookshelf, window overlooking the courtyard. Comfortable enough for someone who chose to live there, not someone abandoned there. Grace helped place my suitcase near the closet. "Would you like some tea?" she asked kindly. "That would be nice." She paused before leaving. "You seem very sharp," she said carefully. I looked up at her. "What makes you say that?" Grace hesitated slightly. "A lot of residents who arrive under similar circumstances usually seem more confused." Similar circumstances. Interesting phrase again. I smiled faintly. My memory works just fine. Something flickered across Grace's face. Concern. Real concern. After she left, I slowly sat on the edge of the bed and let silence settle around me. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. My own son had placed me in a nursing home without my consent. Not after illness, not after dementia, not after a medical emergency, because I had become inconvenient. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I forced them back down immediately. Crying would not help me think clearly. And right now, thinking clearly mattered more than emotions. I opened my purse carefully and checked the documents I'd taken from the SUV. Still there. Good. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Grace returned carrying tea on a tray. "I figured you might need something warm." "You're very kind." She sat the tray beside me and glanced briefly toward the paperwork partially visible near my purse. Then her expression shifted subtly. Professional. Cautious. Mrs. Thompson? She said slowly. May I ask you something? Of course. Do you know what your intake evaluation says? A chill ran through me instantly. No. Grace hesitated. It states that you've shown increasing cognitive confusion, memory instability, and inability to independently manage financial decisions. I stared at her. For several seconds, I genuinely couldn't speak. Not because I was confused, because I was furious. That's not true, I said quietly. I didn't think so. My hands tightened around the edge of the blanket. They told you I'm mentally unstable? Grace lowered her voice. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She looked uncomfortable now, like someone realizing they accidentally stepped into something much darker than expected. I stood slowly and walked toward the desk near the window. Can I see the file? Grace hesitated. I'm technically not supposed to. Please. Something in my voice must have convinced her. After a long pause, she nodded carefully. I'll bring a copy later tonight when the supervisor leaves. My heart pounded harder now, not from fear, from clarity. This was bigger than I thought, much bigger. If Ethan submitted false cognitive concerns, then he wasn't just trying to help manage my life. He was building legal justification to control it. Control my finances, my home, possibly everything Richard and I spent decades building. Grace moved toward the door, then paused again. Mrs. Thompson. Yes, has anyone officially diagnosed you with memory problems? No. Any neurologist, psychiatrist? No. She exhaled quietly. I thought so. After she left, I sat alone by the window watching elderly residents slowly cross the courtyard below. One woman pushed her husband's wheelchair while holding his hand. Another man sat alone staring at birds near the fountain. And suddenly, I wondered how many people in this building truly chose to be here. How many had families who visited every weekend, and how many had simply become burdens someone wanted removed. An hour later, Ethan returned to say goodbye. Vanessa stood beside him, holding her purse tightly. Neither of them looked emotional anymore. That part of the performance had ended. You okay? Ethan asked. Such a small question. So empty. I studied his face carefully. There was tension there now. Nervousness. Maybe he feared I would suddenly refuse to cooperate. Maybe he feared I already knew too much. I'm tired, I answered. Relief crossed his face instantly. Vanessa stepped forward and kissed my cheek lightly. Call us if you need anything. I almost asked if that included my own house. Instead, I simply nodded. Ethan picked up his car keys quickly. We'll visit soon. Not we love you. Not we're sorry. We'll visit soon. Like I was already somebody living at the edge of their lives instead of the center. As they walked toward the hallway exit, I noticed Vanessa smile faintly at Ethan. A private smile. Victorious. Then they disappeared around the corner. Gone. Just like that, I stood motionless for a long time after they left. Then slowly, I walked back toward the desk, where Grace had briefly placed my intake file earlier. The folder still sat partially open. I knew I shouldn't, but I looked anyway. And there it was. Patient demonstrates signs of confusion and diminished financial judgment. Below that sentence sat a physician authorization signature I didn't recognize. But one line beneath it made my blood run cold. Family recommendation strongly advised assisted supervision of all assets. All assets. Not health, not safety, assets. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I quietly closed the file, because in that moment, I finally understood the truth. My son hadn't brought me here to protect me. He brought me here to erase me. That first night at Silver Pines, I didn't sleep at all. The room was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, institutional quiet. The kind of silence that settles over places where people slowly disappear from the lives they once had. I sat beside the window wrapped in a blanket, staring down at the parking lot illuminated by pale security lights. Every now and then, a nurse crossed the courtyard, or a car pulled into the circular driveway below. But mostly, there was nothing. And in the middle of that silence, my thoughts kept circling the same terrifying realization. Ethan had tried to gain legal control over my finances. Not just help me, control me. At around 11:30, there was a soft knock at my door. Grace stepped inside quietly. "I brought your evening medication," she whispered. "I don't take evening medication." She gave me a small, knowing look. "I know." She placed the paper cup on the table anyway for appearances, then carefully closed the door behind her. In her hand was a thin manila folder. My intake file. My pulse quickened. Grace lowered her voice. "You only have a few minutes." I nodded immediately. She handed me the file and stood near the door, listening for footsteps in the hallway. My hands remained steady as I opened it. Years in business taught me something important: panic clouds judgment. And right now, I needed clarity. The first few pages contained basic information: age, blood pressure, emergency contact. Then I reached the psychological evaluation summary. Patient demonstrates intermittent confusion, emotional instability following spouse's death, and declining independent financial judgment. I read the sentence 3 times. Every word had been chosen carefully, not enough to declare me legally incompetent outright, but enough to begin building a narrative Ethan could eventually use in court. My chest tightened painfully. Beneath the evaluation sat a physician's signature. Dr. Alan Pierce. I had never met a Dr. Alan Pierce in my life. "Grace," I whispered. "Who submitted this?" She shook her head slightly. "I don't know. But your son provided most of the intake documentation personally." "Of course he did." I kept reading. "Recommendation supervised financial oversight strongly encouraged under family guidance." Family guidance, meaning Ethan. There it was, the real reason I had been brought here. Not safety, not care, access. I closed the file slowly. Grace studied my face carefully. "You seem remarkably calm." I looked at her. "When my husband and I started our company 40 years ago, a man once tried to steal half our business through forged contracts." Grace blinked in surprise. "What happened? We sued him, and we won." For the first time that evening, the corner of Grace's mouth lifted slightly. "Good," her expression seemed to say. Then she grew serious again. "You need someone outside this facility you can trust." Immediately, one name entered my mind. Michael Carter, Richard's closest friend. Our attorney for nearly 30 years. The man who helped us build the Thompson Family Trust from the ground up. Grace hesitated before speaking again. "There's a staff phone in the downstairs office. After midnight, the supervisor leaves for rounds." I understood immediately. "You're risking your job." "I know." "Why help me?" Grace looked down briefly before answering. "My mother spent the last year of her life in a place like this," she said quietly. "She kept telling me she didn't belong there." Something inside me softened. "And did she?" Grace swallowed hard. "No." The silence between us suddenly felt heavier than before. Not awkward. Human. After Grace left, I waited in the darkness, listening to the slow ticking of the clock near my bed. 12:15, then 12:23. Finally, another soft knock. Grace opened the door slightly. "Now." I followed her quietly through dim hallways, while most residents slept behind closed doors. The facility looked different at night. Less polished, less cheerful. Without daytime smiles and music, Silver Pines felt strangely hollow. Grace led me into a small administrative office near the nurse's station and handed me the cordless phone. "You'll have about 10 minutes. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed Michael's number from memory. 3 rings, then his tired voice answered. "Michael Carter." "Michael," I whispered. Silence, then sudden alarm. Layla, emotion nearly broke through my composure hearing someone who actually sounded concerned for me. "Where are you?" he asked immediately. "In a nursing home." "What Silver Pines?" Another silence. Longer this time. When Michael finally spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Sharp. Focused. "What happened?" I closed my eyes briefly. "My son happened." I explained everything carefully. The rushed move, the paperwork, the false evaluation, the financial documents hidden inside medical forms. Michael interrupted only once. "Did you sign the power of attorney? No. Are you certain?" "Yes. Thank God." Relief flooded his voice so intensely that it frightened me. "Michael," I asked quietly, "how bad is this?" I heard papers shuffling on his end of the line. Then his voice lowered. "Layla, Ethan contacted my office 6 weeks ago." My stomach dropped instantly. "What he requested copies of certain trust documents." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I refused him access, and he claimed it was just for future estate planning." Estate planning. The phrase suddenly sounded poisonous. Michael continued carefully. "I thought it was unusual, but not criminal." "Now I'm not so sure." I gripped the phone tighter. "What exactly does Ethan think he controls?" "That's the interesting part," Michael replied. I could practically hear him switching into attorney mode. "Legally, almost nothing." A flicker of hope moved through me. Michael continued. "Richard structured the trust very specifically after the market crash in 2008. I remembered those meetings vividly now. Richard became obsessed with asset protection afterward." "What does that mean for Ethan?" "It means the house investment accounts and majority business holdings remain protected under trust authority." "And who controls that authority?" A brief pause. "You do." I closed my eyes. For the first time since arriving at Silver Pines, I could breathe again. Ethan didn't know. All this time, he didn't actually own what he thought he owned. Michael lowered his voice further. "But Layla, there's something else." My chest tightened again. "What I've noticed, several recent financial inquiries connected to Ethan's business accounts." I frowned. "What kind of inquiries?" "High-risk borrowing activity." The room suddenly felt colder. Michael continued. "He's leveraged almost everything he personally owns." My heart sank, not because of the money, because I finally understood the desperation behind Ethan's behavior. "He's in trouble," I whispered. "Yes." "How bad?" Another pause. "Bad enough that he may believe your assets are his only way out." I sat down slowly in the office chair. Suddenly, every moment from the past few months rearranged itself in my memory. Ethan becoming distracted. Vanessa pushing expensive renovations. The constant conversations about market pressure. The forced concern about my safety. None of this started because I got older. It started because Ethan got desperate. "Michael," I said quietly, "I think he forged documents. I think you may be right." Anger finally began replacing grief inside me. Not wild anger. Controlled anger. The dangerous kind. "What do we do now?" I asked. Michael's answer came immediately. "First, you do absolutely nothing publicly." I listened carefully. "Second, Keep every document you took. I have them hidden. Good. And third, his voice hardened. Tomorrow morning I start digging into every financial move your son has made in the last 6 months. Footsteps suddenly echoed outside the office. Grace appeared instantly at the doorway. Hurry. I nodded. Michael, I whispered, he put me here because he thought I was weak. Michael's response came without hesitation. Then your son made the biggest mistake of his life. After the call ended, I handed the phone back to Grace slowly. Neither of us spoke while walking back toward my room. But before she left, Grace paused beside the doorway. You know, she said softly, most people who come here stop fighting after the first night. I looked at the dark hallway behind her, then back at the hidden documents inside my purse. No, I answered quietly. I'm just getting started. The morning after Ethan left me at Silver Pines, he walked into my house carrying a bottle of expensive champagne. At least that's what Vanessa later posted on social media. I saw the picture 3 hours after it went online. Grace showed it to me quietly during breakfast, while pretending to refill my coffee. Vanessa stood in my kitchen wearing silk pajamas, smiling beside the marble countertop Richard and I saved for nearly a year to afford. Ethan stood behind her, with his arm around her waist, forcing a tired smile while holding champagne glasses. The caption read, New Beginnings. Grateful for family peace and fresh starts. Fresh starts. I stared at the photo for a very long time. Not because it hurt, because it revealed something important. They already believed the house belonged to them. Grace lowered her voice. I probably shouldn't have shown you this. No, I answered calmly. I needed to see it. That morning, Silver Pines hosted a watercolor painting activity in the recreation room. Residents sat quietly around folding tables while soft jazz played through ceiling speakers. I attended only because I needed time to think. Not about revenge, about strategy. Emotion makes people reckless. Richard taught me that too. When I was younger, I used to believe strength meant reacting quickly. Richard believed the opposite. The most dangerous person in the room, he once told me, is usually the calmest one. So I stayed calm. While other residents painted flowers and lakes, I mentally rebuilt the last 6 months of Ethan's behavior piece by piece. The expensive watches, the sudden stress, the forced optimism whenever business came up. The arguments between him and Vanessa they thought I couldn't hear. Something had gone very wrong financially. And now I knew why they were moving so aggressively. Around noon, Grace entered the recreation room and quietly handed me a note. Call Michael. Urgent. I excused myself immediately. When Michael answered, his voice sounded tighter than before. I've spent all morning reviewing Ethan's financial activity. And a long pause followed. Layla, your son is drowning. I closed the office door behind me. How bad, worse than I expected. Papers shuffled on his end of the line. He's leveraged his company against future development contracts that never materialized. I frowned. What does that mean exactly? It means he promised investors profits based on projects he couldn't actually fund. My stomach sank. Ethan had always been ambitious, but Richard often warned he lacked patience. He borrowed to survive. He borrowed to maintain appearances, Michael corrected. That hurt even more because I knew it was probably true. Ethan cared deeply about how people viewed him. The successful businessman, the provider, the wealthy son of Richard Thompson. Michael continued. There's more. Of course there was. He attempted to use your property as collateral last week. Ice flooded my chest instantly. What he submitted preliminary financial inquiries through 2 lenders. I gripped the edge of the desk. Without my permission? Yes. And they denied the request because ownership verification triggered trust protections. I closed my eyes briefly. Thank God for Richard. Years ago, I thought my husband had been overly cautious creating the trust structure. Now I realized he had been protecting me from a future neither of us wanted to imagine. Did Ethan know the request was denied? Oh, he knows now. Something in Michael's tone caught my attention. What happened? He called my office this morning, and he was furious. I could picture it easily. Ethan pacing, raising his voice, trying to intimidate people into solving problems he created himself. What did he say? Michael sighed heavily. He demanded access to trust documents again. Claimed he was acting in your best interest. I almost laughed. How generous of him. Michael's voice hardened. Layla, he's desperate. The word lingered heavily between us. Desperate people do dangerous things. After the call ended, I sat alone in the small administrative office, staring at the framed motivational quote hanging on the wall. Aging is another stage of becoming. Funny, nobody tells you aging also reveals who truly sees your humanity, and who only sees opportunity. That evening, while I ate dinner in the main dining hall, I watched families visiting residents around me. One man's granddaughter brushed his hair gently while he told stories from Vietnam. A woman around my age laughed softly while her daughter painted her nails. Tiny acts of love, ordinary, beautiful. And suddenly grief hit me harder than anger ever had. Not because Ethan wanted my money, because somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me as his mother. I became an asset, a solution, a financial escape route. Grace sat beside me later while residents drifted back toward their rooms. You okay? No, I admitted honestly. She nodded like she respected the truth more than fake optimism. Michael found out Ethan tried to use my home as collateral. Grace looked horrified. He can't do that, can he? No, but he tried. I looked down at my untouched tea. When Richard died, Ethan cried in my arms for an hour, I whispered. He kept saying he'd take care of me. Grace stayed silent. I believed him. A lump rose painfully in my throat. I think that's the hardest part. Grace rested a gentle hand over mine. People change under pressure. Yes, I said quietly. But character decides what they become. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan as a child. He used to sleep with the hallway light on because thunderstorms terrified him. At 12 years old, he saved allowance money for months to buy me a birthday necklace shaped like a tiny silver heart. When Richard traveled for work, Ethan would sit beside me at dinner saying, "Don't worry, Mom. I'm the man of the house tonight." Where had that boy gone? Or had life simply stripped away the kindness until only fear remained underneath? Around 9:30, my phone rang unexpectedly. Grace had secretly arranged for Michael to send me a prepaid cell phone earlier that afternoon. Only 3 people knew the number, so when I answered, I expected Michael. Instead, I heard Ethan. Mom, his voice sounded strained, tired. How did you get this number? Michael gave it to me. That irritated me immediately. He shouldn't have. Silence. Then Ethan spoke carefully. The bank's making things complicated. Not, how are you? Not, I'm sorry. The bank? Of course. I leaned back slowly in my chair. What kind of complications? Another pause. They're questioning property documentation. And why would they do that? His breathing sharpened slightly. Mom, this isn't a good time for games. Games. Interesting word again. I'm 80 miles away in a nursing home, Ethan. You're the one trying to access my property. His voice lowered instantly. I'm trying to protect everything Dad built. No, I answered quietly. You're trying to save yourself. Silence exploded across the line. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan sighed heavily. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Then explain it." But he didn't, because explanations would require honesty. Instead, he changed directions. "We'll come visit tomorrow. As if pretending normalcy could still fix this. "That won't be necessary. Mom. You already made your decision." My voice remained calm. That seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. Finally, he spoke again, softer this time. "You always think I'm the bad guy." I almost laughed at the absurdity of that sentence. "You placed me in a nursing home using false paperwork. I did what I had to do." There it was. The truth. Not guilt. Justification. I closed my eyes slowly. When people start saying they did what they had to do, I whispered they usually already know they crossed a line. He didn't answer. And for the first time in my life, the silence between my son and me felt like standing on opposite sides of a canyon too wide to cross. The next morning, rain hammered against the windows of Silver Pines, hard enough to rattle the glass. I sat alone in the dining hall, with a cup of weak coffee watching gray skies swallow the courtyard outside. Most residents stayed in their rooms because of the weather, leaving the building unusually quiet. The silence gave my thoughts too much room. I kept replaying Ethan's voice from the phone call the night before. I did what I had to do. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I made a mistake." Just justification. That sentence haunted me more than the forged paperwork, because it meant my son no longer believed morality applied to him once desperation entered the room. Around 10 that morning, Grace found me in the library area reading an old mystery novel I hadn't actually absorbed a single page of. "Michael's online too," she whispered. Something in her expression immediately told me this wasn't a routine update. I followed her quickly to the downstairs office. The moment Michael answered, I heard exhaustion in his voice. I barely slept. My stomach tightened. "What did you find?" A long pause followed. Then papers shuffled heavily. "Layla, Ethan's situation is worse than I thought." I sat down slowly. How much worse he owes just over $4 million. The number hit me like ice water. For several seconds, I genuinely couldn't speak. 4 million. My son wasn't struggling financially. He was collapsing. "How is that even possible?" I whispered. Michael exhaled heavily. "Bad investments, construction delays, private lenders, short-term borrowing with insane interest rates." I closed my eyes. Richard warned Ethan for years about chasing fast expansion. But Ethan always hated slow growth. He wanted bigger deals, bigger risks, bigger appearances. Michael continued carefully. "And Layla, there's something else." Of course there was. "He used your name repeatedly during negotiations." My eyes opened instantly. "What do you mean?" "He implied your trust assets backed portions of his future liquidity." Anger rose sharp and immediate inside my chest. "He promised people my money, yes, without asking me, yes." I stood and walked toward the small office window, trying to steady my breathing. Rain streaked across the glass like tears. "I need specifics." Michael didn't hesitate. He met with at least 3 investor groups over the past 8 months. Multiple witnesses confirm he referenced family secured stability. Family secured stability. Carefully worded enough to avoid outright fraud, but misleading enough to gain confidence. My confidence, my reputation, everything Richard and I built over decades. "He leveraged our name," I whispered. Yes. Pain settled deeper inside me now. Not just betrayal, humiliation, because Ethan knew exactly what the Thompson name meant in Chicago business circles. Richard spent 40 years building trust with investors, contractors, and employees. And Ethan used that legacy like collateral. Michael lowered his voice. I also found something disturbing in the trust inquiry records. What he submitted documents containing signatures that do not appear authentic. I froze completely. You're saying he forged my signature? Yes. The room suddenly felt too small. I gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles ached. A memory surfaced violently in my mind. Ethan, at 16 years old. He came home crying after accidentally scratching a neighbor's car while learning to drive. Richard offered to handle it quietly, but Ethan insisted on walking next door himself to apologize. He needs integrity more than protection, Richard told me afterward. So, what happened to that boy? How does someone travel from honesty to forgery? Michael's voice pulled me back. I'm having a handwriting expert review everything now. Michael. Yes, if this becomes public, it may destroy him. The truth landed heavily between us, and despite everything, hearing it still hurt. Because Ethan wasn't just a dishonest businessman. He was my son. The little boy I carried through fevers. The teenager whose college applications I stayed up helping him write. The man I held while he cried at his father's funeral. I sank slowly back into the chair. I keep asking myself where I failed. Michael answered immediately. You didn't fail. Yes, I did. No, he said firmly. Your son made choices. Don't confuse that with your worth as a mother. Tears burned behind my eyes. I rarely cried in front of people after Richard died. Something about widowhood teaches you how to grieve privately. But this pain felt different. Not death. Corruption. Watching someone you love become unrecognizable. Michael's voice softened. Layla. Richard worried about this. I swallowed hard. I know. No, he said quietly. You don't. My stomach tightened again. What are you talking about? Another pause. Then Michael spoke carefully. 3 years before Richard passed away, he amended sections of the trust. I frowned. Why? Because Ethan approached him asking for access to company reserves. That didn't surprise me. But Michael continued. When Richard refused, Ethan became aggressive. Aggressive. The word sounded wrong attached to my son. What happened? They argued privately in my office. I stared ahead silently. I wasn't supposed to tell you unless circumstances required it, Michael admitted. But Richard feared Ethan's desperation would eventually override his judgment. Pain moved through me like slow poison. Richard saw this coming, and I ignored him. I defended Ethan every single time. He's under pressure. He's ambitious. He'll mature eventually. A mother's love can blind her just as easily as it protects. Michael spoke again. Layla, I need to ask something difficult. What do you want to pursue criminal investigation if the forged signatures are confirmed? The question knocked the air from my lungs. Criminal investigation. Not family conflict. Crime. I looked out the rain-covered window again. Somewhere beyond the storm sat the home Richard and I built together. And somewhere inside that home sat my son, convincing himself he was entitled to save his life using mine. I don't know, I whispered honestly. Michael understood immediately. You don't have to decide today. After the call ended, I remained in the office for several minutes, staring at nothing. Grace eventually knocked softly and stepped inside. You okay? I laughed quietly at the absurdity of the question. No, she sat across from me carefully. You found out more about Ethan? I nodded slowly. He forged my signature. Grace's eyes widened. Oh my God, and he owes over $4 million. She leaned back in stunned silence. That explains the panic. Yes, but not the cruelty. I looked at her gratefully. Most people excuse terrible behavior the moment money enters the conversation. Pressure becomes permission. Fear becomes justification. But Grace understood something important. Hardship explains behavior. It does not erase responsibility. That afternoon, I skipped lunch and sat alone in my room going through old photos on my phone. One picture stopped me completely. Ethan, at age 9, standing beside Richard in our backyard holding a fishing pole nearly taller than he was. Both of them smiling proudly at the camera. Richard's hand rested protectively on Ethan's shoulder. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I whispered something aloud I never imagined saying about my own child. I don't know who you became. That evening, Grace knocked again, carrying fresh towels. But her expression looked tense. "What is it?" I asked immediately. She hesitated. "There's someone downstairs asking questions about your medical status." My pulse quickened. "Who?" "A man from one of Ethan's financial offices." Ice slid through my chest. "What kind of questions?" "He wanted confirmation that you're mentally incapable of managing your affairs." Rage hit me so suddenly, I had to grip the bed frame. Not concern, not visitation, verification. Ethan wasn't checking on his mother. He was building a case, and for the first time since arriving at Silver Pines, something inside me changed completely. The grief remained. The heartbreak remained. But beneath both emotions, something colder finally settled into place. Resolve, because this was no longer just about betrayal. My son was actively trying to erase my legal existence while I was still alive, and I suddenly understood something terrifying. If I didn't fight back now, there might soon be nothing left to fight for. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise with one clear thought in my mind. I was done being passive. For days, I had sat quietly inside Silver Pines, reacting to Ethan's decisions, Ethan's lies, Ethan's panic. No more. If my son wanted to build a legal case portraying me as confused and helpless, then I needed to do the exact opposite. I needed proof. Not emotional proof, not maternal heartbreak, objective proof. And fortunately for me, truth leaves trails. At 7:30 that morning, Grace brought breakfast to my room instead of insisting I go downstairs. The moment she closed the door behind her, I spoke quietly. "I need your help." She studied my face carefully. Something about my tone must have sounded different, more focused. "What do you need?" "I need documentation." Grace slowly sat down across from me. "What kind? Everything that proves I'm mentally competent." She nodded immediately. "I can arrange cognitive evaluations. I also want copies of every intake form submitted about me. That may take time. I'm not in a hurry anymore." And that was true. 3 days earlier, I still thought this situation might somehow resolve quietly within the family. Now I understood something painful. Ethan had already crossed too many lines to simply walk backward. Grace folded her hands carefully. "There's another thing you should know." My stomach tightened. "What?" "The administrator received a request this morning asking whether your condition has progressed." The word condition nearly made me laugh. "What did they say?" "That you appear completely stable." Relief moved through me briefly. Then Grace added quietly. The caller didn't seem happy about that. Of course not, because a stable mother couldn't be controlled. After breakfast, Grace escorted me to a private consultation room where one of the facility psychologists conducted a full cognitive evaluation. Memory recall, pattern recognition, problem solving, financial reasoning questions. I answered calmly, clearly, accurately. By the end of the session, the psychologist looked mildly confused. You perform exceptionally well for someone described as cognitively declining. I smiled faintly. Maybe someone described me incorrectly. Her expression shifted subtly. Professional suspicion. Good. Let them start asking questions too. By noon, Grace quietly handed me copies of the preliminary assessment notes. Patient demonstrates strong cognitive functioning, coherent reasoning, excellent memory retention, and full awareness of financial/legal concepts. Exactly what I needed. For the first time since arriving at Silver Pines, I felt something close to control returning. Not victory, control. That afternoon, Michael called again. His voice sounded sharper than usual. Layla, I've started formal protective actions. I closed the door to my room before answering. What kind of actions? Temporary freezes. My pulse quickened. On what any trust-linked accounts Ethan may attempt to access. A slow breath escaped my chest. Good. Michael continued. I'm also filing internal alerts with 2 financial institutions. Will Ethan know? Oh, he'll know. Part of me felt guilty hearing that. Another part remembered the forged signatures, the fake medical evaluations, the attempts to declare me mentally unstable. No more hesitation, I whispered. Good, Michael replied firmly. Because your son certainly isn't hesitating. I sat near the window while he explained the next steps. Asset monitoring, legal preservation notices, documentation protection. Every word reminded me of old business meetings with Richard. Strange how quickly survival wakes up dormant parts of yourself. For years after Richard died, I slowly allowed Ethan to take over conversations involving finances and investments. Partly because I trusted him, partly because grief exhausted me. But now, sitting there with legal documents spread across my bed, I felt something awaken I hadn't felt in years. The businesswoman Richard once depended on. Michael's voice lowered. There's one more thing. What I received copies of recent communications between Ethan and a private lender. I waited silently. He assured them he would gain control of family-held assets within days. My chest tightened instantly. Within days. That's why he moved so fast. That's why the nursing home happened suddenly. That's why the paperwork was rushed. Ethan wasn't planning long-term anymore. He was cornered, and desperate people speed up dangerous decisions. What happens if those lenders realize he lied? I asked quietly. Michael paused. They could destroy him financially. I stared out at the courtyard below. An elderly man carefully pushed his wife's wheelchair along the walking path while adjusting a blanket over her knees. Gentleness. Protection. Love. How different life might have been if Ethan understood those things mattered more than appearances. I never raised him to be cruel, I whispered. No, Michael answered softly. You raised him to survive? Somewhere along the way, he confused survival with entitlement. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Around 4 that afternoon, Grace entered my room carrying a folder. I think you should see this. Inside were copies of my original intake documents. I turned pages slowly, then stopped cold. Under family concerns, Ethan had written, patient, increasingly forgetful, emotionally unstable, vulnerable to financial mismanagement, resistant to assistance. Resistant to assistance. I almost laughed aloud. No, I was resistant to surrender. Huge difference. Then I reached another sentence. Family requests recommendation for supervised financial protections due to impaired judgment. My hands trembled slightly now, not from fear, from anger. Everything had been carefully phrased to sound compassionate, protective, responsible, but beneath the polished language sat one ugly truth. My son was trying to strip away my independence, while pretending it was love. Grace watched me quietly. I'm sorry. For what? That someone used your age against you. I looked up slowly. That's the thing about aging, I said quietly. People stop seeing your experience and start seeing your vulnerability. Grace nodded sadly. And sometimes family becomes the worst about it. That evening, I received another phone call from Ethan. This time, he sounded different immediately. Agitated. Mom, did you contact Michael straight to the point? No greeting? No concern? Yes. Silence exploded across the line. Then, you froze accounts? Interesting. Not, did you freeze accounts? You froze accounts, meaning he already knew. You attempted to access trust assets without authorization, I answered calmly. That money affects my company. No, I corrected softly. That money protects my future. You don't understand what's happening. Then explain it honestly. His breathing sharpened. I'm trying to save everything Dad built. I closed my eyes. No, Ethan. You're trying to save yourself from consequences? That sentence hit him hard enough I could hear the silence afterward. Then his voice changed completely. Colder. You're making a mistake. A chill moved through me instantly. Not because of fear, because I recognized the tone. Pressure. Manipulation. The same tone Richard once warned me about. I already made one mistake, I answered quietly. What's that supposed to mean? I believed love would stop you from using me. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Ethan spoke again, almost desperate now. If the company collapses, everything falls apart. And there it was. The truth finally breaking through. Not concern for me. Fear for himself. How close are you to losing everything, I asked. He didn't answer directly. That answer was enough. I looked around my room slowly. The pale walls. The quiet hallway beyond the door. The nursing home bed my son placed me in so he could gain access to my life. Then I realized something important. 3 days earlier, Ethan believed he held all the power. But power shifts the moment truth enters the room. And for the first time since this nightmare began, my son was finally starting to panic. 3 days after my son left me in that nursing home, everything in his life began collapsing exactly the way I knew it would. Not because I destroyed him, because the truth finally caught up with him. It started at 8:12 on a Thursday morning. I know the exact time because Michael called me the moment it happened. Layla, he said calmly, the first account freeze just triggered. I sat upright in bed instantly. Outside my window, pale morning sunlight stretched across the Silver Pines courtyard, while residents slowly shuffled toward breakfast downstairs. The world looked peaceful. Meanwhile, Ethan's life was beginning to burn. What exactly happened? I asked. One of Ethan's lenders attempted to verify collateral documentation tied to the trust, and they discovered inconsistencies. My pulse slowed instead of quickened. The strange thing about betrayal is this: eventually you stop fearing consequences and start expecting them. Michael continued. The bank escalated the review immediately. I closed my eyes briefly. How bad enough that his operational accounts are now under temporary restriction pending investigation. Temporary restriction. Polite legal language for panic. A memory surfaced suddenly. When Ethan was little, he used to build elaborate towers from wooden blocks in our living room. He'd stack them higher and higher until the structure became unstable. Richard once warned him gently, if the bottom isn't strong, the whole thing falls eventually. Now, decades later, my son's entire life was collapsing for the same reason. Weak foundations. After the call ended, I dressed slowly and went downstairs for breakfast. Grace spotted me immediately. "You heard?" I nodded. "He called you, Michael did." She lowered her voice. "Ethan called here 20 minutes ago." That caught my attention instantly. What did he want to speak with administration? And he sounded angry. Of course he did. Men like Ethan only feel powerful when systems obey them. The moment consequences appear, they become furious at the existence of limits. Grace handed me coffee quietly. "He asked whether you'd been speaking with attorneys?" I almost smiled. "So now he's worried?" "Yes," Grace answered softly, very worried. Around noon, Michael called again. This time, his tone sounded even more serious. "Layla, it's escalating faster than I expected." I moved toward the privacy of the courtyard garden before answering. "What now?" "One of Ethan's private investors is demanding immediate repayment." My stomach tightened. "How much?" "Nearly 800,000. I stopped walking. "That much he promised them secured backing. With my assets." "Yes." I sat slowly on a wooden bench beneath a maple tree, losing its autumn leaves. Residents chatted quietly nearby, while nurses pushed medication carts through the courtyard paths. Ordinary life continued around me while my family imploded. "What happens if he can't pay?" Michael hesitated. "Multiple lawsuits. Possibly fraud investigations." Fraud. The word hit differently now, because this was no longer theoretical. This was real. And somewhere in Chicago, my son was probably realizing for the first time that I was no longer protecting him from consequences. Around 2 o'clock that afternoon, Grace hurried into my room, looking unusually tense. "You need to see this." She handed me her phone. Vanessa's social media account filled the screen. The glamorous champagne photos from 2 days earlier were gone. Every single one. Instead, Vanessa had posted a vague message. "Sometimes the people closest to you keep devastating secrets." I stared at the screen silently. Interesting. Very interesting. Cracks were forming. Grace crossed her arms. "She's turning on him." "Not yet," I answered quietly. "But she's scared." Fear changes loyalties quickly, especially when money disappears. An hour later, Ethan finally called me directly. The moment I answered, I heard chaos in the background. Phones ringing, voices shouting, "Mom?" His voice sounded nothing like the controlled businessman from earlier calls. This was desperation. "What happened?" I asked calmly. "You know exactly what happened." I remained silent. That account freeze triggered lender reviews. His breathing sounded uneven now. "You contacted Michael behind my back." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Behind his back. As though I needed permission to protect my own life. "You forged documents?" I answered quietly. "I was trying to fix things. You were trying to steal control." "No," he snapped immediately. "I was trying to save the company." There it was again. Always the company. Always the image. Always the empire. Never me. "Did you ever once think about what this did to me?" I asked softly. Silence. Then, "You don't understand the pressure." "No," I interrupted for the first time since this nightmare began. "You don't understand what pressure is." My voice stayed calm, but something inside it changed. Even Ethan noticed. "I buried my husband." I continued quietly. "I spent 3 years learning how to survive, losing the only person who truly knew me. And while I was grieving, you were planning how to take control of my life. Mom, you put me in a nursing home using false medical information. I thought you'd be safer there." "No," I answered coldly. "You thought you'd be safer if I stopped asking questions." Heavy silence filled the line. Then Ethan finally said something honest. They're going to destroy me. Not they might. They're going to. He knew, and despite everything, hearing fear in my son's voice still hurt me. Because mothers don't stop loving their children simply because those children become disappointing. That's the tragedy of motherhood. Love survives even when trust dies. I closed my eyes. How much do you owe altogether? He didn't answer immediately. That bad, I whispered. Finally, almost 5 million. The number stole my breath. Michael's estimate had been conservative. Oh my God, Ethan. His voice cracked slightly. I thought I could fix it before anybody found out. That sentence finally revealed the truth underneath everything. Not greed alone. Shame. He wasn't just chasing money. He was terrified of failure. I kept thinking one more project would solve everything, he admitted quietly. And when it didn't, I borrowed more. The old business lessons Richard taught suddenly echoed through my mind again. Desperation expands faster than success. Always. You should have come to me honestly. I couldn't. Why his answer came almost broken. Because Dad already thought I was weak. Pain moved sharply through my chest. Richard had loved Ethan deeply, but he also saw him clearly, and Ethan spent years trying to outrun that feeling. You know what the worst part is, Ethan whispered. What I really did tell myself I was helping you. I looked out the window toward the courtyard fountain below. Water moved calmly despite the storm surrounding everything else. No, I answered softly. You convinced yourself hurting me was acceptable because you were scared. Another long silence. Then Ethan spoke again, smaller this time. What happens now? The question lingered heavily between us. Not what happens legally, not what happens financially. What happens to us? And for the first time since this began, I genuinely didn't know the answer. Before I could respond, another voice suddenly exploded somewhere near Ethan. Tell him we need answers now. Then another voice. The investors are threatening litigation. Panic. Pure panic. Ethan breathed heavily into the phone. I have to go. I almost said goodbye. Instead, I simply whispered, you should have trusted me before it got this far. Then the line disconnected. That evening, Michael arrived at Silver Pines in person, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He looked exhausted, but determined. Things are moving quickly now, he said. How quickly? He sat across from me carefully. Layla, Ethan received formal removal notice from the trust property this afternoon. My pulse slowed. Meaning the house. My house. Richard's house. No longer accessible to Ethan legally. Michael opened the briefcase and handed me copies of official documents. I stared at the words quietly. Unauthorized occupancy pending trust enforcement review. Everything was real now. Final. Irreversible. 3 days earlier, Ethan walked me into this nursing home believing I was powerless. Now his company was collapsing. His accounts were frozen. His investors were panicking. And the home he thought belonged to him was legally pushing him out. Not because I destroyed him, because he built his future on lies. And lies eventually collapse under their own weight. Ethan arrived at Silver Pines just after 9 the next morning. I knew it was him before I even saw him. His voice echoed through the lobby loud enough to reach the second floor. I need to speak to my mother right now. The anger in his tone sent nervous silence through the building. Residents turned in their chairs. Nurses exchanged uneasy looks behind the reception desk. I stood slowly from the armchair near my window. Grace appeared moments later outside my room. He's here, I figured. He's furious. No, I said quietly. He's terrified. That was the truth. Real anger burns hot and fast. What Ethan carried now was colder than anger. Panic. The kind that happens when a person realizes their entire life was built on assumptions that are suddenly disappearing beneath them. Grace hesitated. You don't have to see him. Yes, I answered softly. I do, because some confrontations eventually become unavoidable, and running from truth only gives it more power. When I entered the downstairs lounge, Ethan stood near the reception desk, pacing aggressively while holding his phone in one hand. He looked awful. Wrinkled shirt, red eyes, unshaven jaw, dark circles beneath his face that made him suddenly look older than 42. For one heartbreaking second, I saw the exhausted little boy he used to be after nightmares woke him in the middle of the night. Then he turned toward me, and the bitterness returned instantly. There you are. His voice carried accusation instead of relief. Several staff members lingered nearby, pretending not to watch. Grace stood close enough to intervene if necessary. I remained calm. You're disturbing people. You froze everything. There it was. Not hello. Not how are you. Money first. Always money first. I slowly sat down in one of the lounge chairs near the fireplace. If you're going to yell, I said quietly, you can leave. That seemed to throw him off balance for a moment. Ethan wasn't used to me speaking to him that way. After Richard died, I spent years avoiding conflict with my son, because grief made everything feel fragile. Now I realized avoidance only delayed the inevitable. Ethan lowered his voice slightly, but the rage remained underneath. Do you understand what you've done? I looked directly into his eyes. Yes. No, you don't. I protected my assets. You destroyed my company. No, I corrected calmly. Your decisions destroyed your company. His jaw tightened violently. You think this is funny? I think it's tragic. The word hit him harder than yelling would have. For a moment, silence settled heavily between us. Then, Ethan leaned closer. You could have helped me. There it was. The belief underneath everything. Entitlement. Not Mom. I made mistakes. Not Mom. I'm sorry. You could have helped me. As though my purpose in life was absorbing consequences for him forever. You never asked for help honestly? I said quietly. I didn't have time. You had months. He ran a hand through his hair aggressively. You don't understand how fast things spiraled. Then explain it. Ethan laughed bitterly. You want the truth now? Yes. For several seconds, he just stared at me. Then something inside him cracked open. The downtown project failed, he admitted quietly. Investors pulled out after construction delays. I listened silently. I thought I could recover the losses through the Oak Ridge deal. But you borrowed more money. Yes. His breathing grew uneven. When that failed too, lenders started pressuring me. I remembered Michael's words clearly. Desperate people speed up dangerous decisions. Ethan continued. I kept thinking if I could just buy enough time, you'd fix it before anyone found out. His eyes snapped toward mine instantly, because I understood him. That startled him more than judgment would have. I wasn't trying to hurt you, he whispered. The sadness in his voice almost broke me. Almost. But then I remembered the forged signatures, the false medical evaluations, the nursing home room upstairs. You already did, I answered softly. Ethan looked away first. A long silence followed. Then his voice hardened again. You still could have stopped this. I frowned slightly. What do you mean, the trust removal notice? Ah, there it was again. The house. My lawyers are forcing Vanessa and me out by Friday. My lawyers? I repeated quietly. He froze slightly. Interesting. Not your lawyer, not Michael. My lawyers. Even now, Ethan still saw himself separate from me instead of responsible to me. That's my home too, he snapped suddenly. No, I answered calmly. It isn't. His face darkened instantly. I grew up there, and I built it. The room went silent. Even the receptionist stopped pretending not to listen. I continued quietly. Your father and I sacrificed everything for that house. Ethan laughed bitterly. You act like I'm some stranger trying to rob you. Aren't you? That hit him hard enough. He physically stepped backward. Pain flashed across his face. Real pain. Good. Because truth should hurt sometimes. You think I wanted any of this? He whispered. No, I said honestly. I think you wanted success badly enough to justify terrible choices. His breathing sharpened again. I was trying not to fail. There are worse things than failure. He looked at me silently. Like what? Becoming someone you no longer recognize. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan's voice cracked unexpectedly. I'm scared. The word stunned me. Not because of what he said, because it was the first truly honest thing he'd spoken since this nightmare began. My anger softened slightly despite myself. What are you scared of? He sat down heavily across from me. Everything. The single word sounded exhausted. Investors are threatening lawsuits. Vanessa barely talks to me. The company's collapsing. His voice lowered. And now you hate me. Oh, Ethan, if only hatred were that simple. I looked at my son carefully. The same child whose forehead I kissed through fevers. The same boy who once held my hand crossing busy streets. Love doesn't disappear when someone hurts you. That's what makes betrayal so painful. I don't hate you, I whispered. His eyes lifted toward mine instantly. But I don't trust you anymore. That sentence hurt him worse than anything else I'd said. I could see it. Because trust is what makes family feel safe. And he destroyed ours himself. Ethan leaned forward desperately. What happens now? Again, that question. What happens now? I looked toward the large windows facing the courtyard. Residents slowly walked outside beneath pale autumn sunlight, while leaves drifted across the pathways. Life continuing, always continuing. That depends on you, I answered quietly. He frowned. What does that mean? It means consequences are here whether you like them or not. You want me ruined. No. Then what? I met his eyes directly. I want you to finally stop lying. Silence. Then Ethan whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. I don't know how. My chest tightened painfully, because for the first time I believed him. Somewhere between ambition and fear, my son had lost himself so completely, he no longer knew how to exist without manipulation. Grace suddenly stepped closer beside the reception desk. Mr. Thompson, she said carefully, you need to lower your voice. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him now. Not arrogance, not entitlement. Collapse. And suddenly, I understood something important. 3 days ago, Ethan thought putting me in this place would solve his problems. Instead, it forced every hidden truth in his life into the open. The lies, the debt, the desperation, the fear, everything. Ethan looked at me one last time before standing. I never thought it would get this far. Neither did I. But some choices begin collapsing long before people notice the damage. And as my son slowly walked toward the exit of Silver Pines, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, I realized losing money wasn't the worst thing happening to him. He was losing the ability to recognize himself. 2 days after Ethan's outburst at Silver Pines, Vanessa came to see me alone. That surprised me more than anything else that week. Grace called my room around noon. "There's a visitor asking for you." "Ethan, no." A brief pause. "It's Vanessa." I sat silently for a moment, staring at the rain drifting down outside my window. Interesting. Very interesting. Vanessa had barely contacted me since I arrived at Silver Pines. Aside from a few cold text messages pretending concern, she stayed invisible while Ethan spiraled publicly. Which meant one thing. Something had changed. "Send her up," I said quietly. 20 minutes later, she stood awkwardly inside my room, looking nothing like the polished woman from those champagne photos. Her makeup was hurried, her hair messy. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. And for the first time in 12 years, Vanessa Thompson looked genuinely frightened. Neither of us spoke immediately. She clutched her expensive handbag tightly while glancing around the room uncomfortably. I remained seated near the window. Finally, she exhaled shakily. "I didn't know where else to go." "Not hello, not how are you. Straight to desperation. Interesting how crisis strips away performance." I gestured toward the chair across from me. "Sit down." Vanessa obeyed quietly. That alone told me how bad things had become. Normally, Vanessa filled silence quickly. She hated discomfort. She used charm the way some people use makeup to cover insecurity. Today, she looked too exhausted to pretend. "How is Ethan?" I asked calmly. Her eyes immediately filled with frustration. "He barely sleeps." I stayed silent. "He's drinking too much," she continued. "The investors won't stop calling. The company's losing employees." Still, I said nothing. Then Vanessa finally whispered the real truth. "I think he's breaking." Pain moved through me unexpectedly. Not because Ethan didn't deserve consequences, but because no mother truly prepares herself to watch her child collapse. Vanessa rubbed her forehead tiredly. I didn't realize how serious everything was. I looked at her carefully. "Yes, you did." She froze. "Not because I yelled, because I spoke honestly." "You may not have known numbers," I continued quietly, "but you knew he was hiding something." Vanessa looked down immediately. Silence confirmed it. I leaned back slowly. "You helped push me out of my own house." Tears suddenly filled her eyes. "That wasn't, don't lie to me now." Her mouth closed instantly. Good, because I was tired of lies. For years, Vanessa survived by polishing ugly truths into prettier shapes, but prettiness collapses quickly under pressure. Finally, she whispered, "I thought Ethan was trying to protect everything." "No," I answered softly. "He was trying to protect his image." That sentence hit her hard, because somewhere deep down, Vanessa already knew it was true. She stared toward the floor for several seconds before speaking again. "The lenders came to the house yesterday." My pulse tightened. "They came in person." She nodded shakily. "They threatened lawsuits. One of them said Ethan misrepresented family assets." There it was, the beginning of the public collapse. Vanessa looked smaller suddenly. Not glamorous, not sophisticated, just scared. "He told me everything was temporary," she whispered. "He said once the trust transferred, everything would stabilize." Transferred. The word made my stomach turn. Not inherited, transferred. Like I was already gone. I looked directly at her. "Did Ethan ever tell you the house belonged to both of you?" "Yes." "And you believed him?" Her silence answered for her. Then she said something unexpected. "I thought you were giving it to us eventually anyway." I stared at her for a long moment. There it was, entitlement disguised as inevitability. The dangerous assumption that older people are simply waiting to disappear so younger people can take over. You know what hurts most? I asked quietly. Vanessa looked up. You both started treating me like I was already dead. Tears rolled down her face instantly. I never wanted this. No, I answered softly. You just enjoyed the benefits while pretending not to see the damage. That made her cry harder. Good, because accountability should hurt. For several minutes, the room remained silent, except for Vanessa trying to steady her breathing. Finally, she reached into her handbag with trembling hands. There's something you need to see. She pulled out printed emails, text messages, financial documents. My pulse slowed instantly. Evidence. She handed them to me carefully. I found these on Ethan's laptop. I read silently. Investor correspondence, loan discussions, property references. Then one particular email made my chest tighten. Once my mother's evaluation is finalized, trust transition should move faster. I closed my eyes briefly, not because I was shocked anymore, because seeing the words in writing made the betrayal feel permanent. Vanessa wiped her eyes. I didn't know he wrote that, but you knew he was trying to gain control. Yes, she admitted quietly. At what point did that stop bothering you? Her face crumpled completely then, when the bills started piling up. Honest, finally. The company looked successful from outside, she whispered, but we were drowning privately. Ethan kept saying one more deal would save us. I remembered Richard saying something similar years ago. Pride makes people borrow against futures they don't actually own. Vanessa continued shakily. We spent money like the success was already real. Expensive vacations, designer furniture, luxury cars, private schools. Image, always image. And now I asked. Her laugh broke halfway into a sob. Now we might lose everything. Might. Interesting that she still used that word. Because deep down, Vanessa still believed someone would save them. Maybe me. I folded the documents carefully. Why are you really here? That question settled heavily between us. Vanessa looked terrified answering it. Because Ethan doesn't know what to do anymore. There it was. Not love, not guilt. Panic. He thinks if you would just unfreeze the accounts. No. The word came immediately, firmly. Vanessa blinked. You didn't even let me finish. I don't need to. Her shoulders collapsed slightly. Then quietly, he's talking about bankruptcy. The room suddenly felt colder. Bankruptcy meant exposure, investigations, public records, total humiliation. And despite everything, part of me still hurt for Ethan. That's the cruel thing about motherhood. Love survives logic. Vanessa stared at me desperately. What happens now? That question again. Everyone suddenly wanted answers after ignoring consequences for so long. I looked down at the printed emails in my lap. My own son discussing trust transition while placing me in a nursing home. Like I was paperwork instead of a person. Now I answered quietly, the truth finishes unfolding. Vanessa swallowed hard. Then she whispered something that surprised me. I think Ethan's ashamed. I looked at her carefully. No, I said softly. I think Ethan's frightened, because shame comes with accountability. Fear only comes with loss. Vanessa sat silently for a long moment before speaking again. There's one more thing. My stomach tightened. What he blamed me yesterday. That didn't surprise me nearly as much as it should have. For what? For encouraging the move? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. When collapse begins, people start searching desperately for smaller mirrors to blame, instead of facing themselves. Vanessa wiped fresh tears away. I know I'm not innocent. No, she wasn't. But she also wasn't the architect of this disaster. Ethan was. And somewhere beneath all the greed and panic, I still remembered the boy he used to be. That made everything worse. Vanessa stood slowly near the door. Are you going to press charges? The question lingered heavily in the room. I answered honestly, I don't know yet. Fear flashed across her face instantly. Not for herself, for Ethan. Because now she finally understood how serious this truly was. Before leaving, Vanessa paused at the doorway. Then she whispered something so quietly, I almost missed it. He really did love you once. Pain moved through me sharply. Because I believed that too. And maybe that was the greatest tragedy of all. Not that my son never loved me, but that fear, pride, and desperation slowly became stronger than that love. After Vanessa left, I sat alone for a very long time staring at the evidence spread across my bed. Emails, documents, lies. And somewhere beneath all of it sat one unbearable truth. My son didn't become a monster overnight. He became one compromise at a time. The family meeting happened the following Monday in Michael Carter's downtown office. The same office where Richard and I spent decades building our future. The same office where our son once sat proudly between us after graduating college, promising he would honor everything we worked for. Now, I was returning there to confront the ruins of that promise. Michael arranged transportation from Silver Pines early that morning. Grace insisted on helping me get ready like it was some kind of emotional armor ritual. You don't have to do this alone, she said while fastening the buttons on my coat. For a moment, emotion caught in my throat. Because kindness feels different after betrayal. More valuable. More visible. By 10:30, I stepped into Michael's office for the first time in nearly 3 years. The familiar smell of leather chairs and old paper instantly brought Richard rushing back into my memory. I could almost hear his voice teasing Michael about his terrible coffee. For one painful second, grief hit me so hard I nearly lost my balance. Grace quietly touched my arm. You okay? No, I whispered honestly, but I'm ready. Inside the conference room, Ethan already sat at the long mahogany table. Vanessa sat beside him, pale and silent. Neither of them looked up immediately when I entered. That alone told me everything. Guilt changes body language before words ever do. Michael stood near the window, holding a thick folder filled with documents. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded colder than I had ever heard it before. Thank you all for coming. Nobody answered. Rain streaked softly against the office windows, while downtown Chicago moved restlessly below us. The room felt heavy, like truth itself had weight. I slowly took my seat across from Ethan. For several seconds, we simply looked at each other. He appeared exhausted, not just tired, destroyed. The sharp confidence he once carried everywhere had disappeared completely. And suddenly, I remembered him at age 7 after losing his first baseball game. He cried quietly in the car because he thought disappointing Richard meant losing his father's love. Richard held his shoulder and said, You are not your failures, son. God, how had we ended up here? Michael finally broke the silence. I'll keep this straightforward. He opened the folder carefully. Over the past several weeks, evidence has emerged involving unauthorized financial representations, forged signatures, false medical documentation, and attempted trust interference connected to Mrs. Layla Thompson. The legal language sounded brutally clean. Too clean for something this painful. Ethan stared down at the table silently. Vanessa looked close to tears already. Michael continued. Before we discuss consequences, there are several facts that need to be clearly understood. He turned toward me first. Layla, as surviving trustee, you remain the sole controlling authority over the Thompson Family Trust. I nodded quietly. Then Michael looked directly at Ethan. You never possessed ownership authority over the house trust reserves or primary investment holdings. Ethan finally spoke. You knew I thought I would eventually inherit them. Michael's expression hardened instantly. Inheritance expectations do not equal ownership. Silence. Then Michael placed several documents on the table, one by one. Property protections, trust amendments, asset control provisions. Finally, he slid forward the most devastating evidence of all. Handwriting analysis reports. Ethan's face lost color immediately. These signatures, Michael said calmly, do not match Layla Thompson's verified legal records. The room went completely still. I watched my son carefully, watched the exact moment denial became impossible. Vanessa covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Oh my God. Ethan still said nothing. Michael continued. You submitted these documents during lender negotiations tied to at least 3 separate financial arrangements. Still silence. Then Michael revealed another stack. Medical intake records from Silver Pines, false cognitive concerns, manipulated evaluations, financial instability claims. I felt physically ill seeing everything laid out together so clearly. Not because I didn't already know, because seeing betrayal organized into evidence somehow made it even more real. Michael's voice remained steady. These records were used to support arguments for supervised financial oversight of Layla Thompson. Finally, Ethan spoke quietly. I didn't create the medical reports, but you submitted them, Michael answered immediately. Silence again. The rain outside grew heavier. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed normally. Then Michael said something that changed the entire room. Richard Thompson anticipated this possibility years ago. Ethan looked up instantly. What Michael removed one final document from the folder. An amendment signed 4 years before Richard died. I recognized Richard's handwriting immediately. My chest tightened painfully. Michael read aloud. In the event any beneficiary attempts coercive financial control against my wife through manipulation, deception, or undue influence, all discretionary trust privileges shall be suspended indefinitely. Ethan's face completely collapsed, because now he understood the terrible truth. His father saw this weakness in him long before anyone else admitted it aloud. No, Ethan whispered. Michael placed the document carefully onto the table. Your father loved you deeply, he said quietly. But he also understood your relationship with money frightened him. Tears instantly filled Ethan's eyes. That broke something inside me, not because he didn't deserve accountability, but because no mother wants to watch her child realize their father lost trust in them before he died. Vanessa looked horrified. You never told me this, she whispered to Ethan. I didn't know, he answered weakly. And for once, I believed him, because Ethan truly never imagined Richard planned for this exact scenario. Michael leaned forward slightly. Layla now faces several options. The room tightened instantly. Civil litigation, protective orders, potential fraud referrals. Every possible consequence sat quietly waiting. Ethan looked at me finally. Not angrily this time, not defensively, just broken. Mom. His voice cracked on the word, and suddenly, all I could see was the little boy who used to run into my arms after school, holding spelling test papers. Not this man drowning in debt and shame. Just my son. How did it get this bad? I whispered. Ethan covered his face briefly with both hands. I kept thinking I could fix it before anyone found out. There it was again, that same tragic sentence. I was embarrassed, he admitted quietly. Every project failed. Every loan got bigger. I couldn't stand looking weak. You looked weaker lying, I answered softly. His eyes filled completely then. I know. Vanessa suddenly spoke for the first time in nearly an hour. He stopped sleeping months ago, she whispered. He kept saying one deal would save everything. Michael remained silent now. This was no longer legal strategy. This was grief. The grief of watching a family realize exactly how far things had fallen. I looked at Ethan carefully. Did you ever actually plan to leave me in Silver Pines permanently? The question shattered something in him instantly. No, he whispered. I swear to God, no. Then what was the plan? His voice shook violently now. I thought once the financial pressure eased, I could fix everything before you knew. But that was the tragedy, wasn't it? People who lie long enough eventually believe they can erase damage after benefiting from it. I folded my hands slowly in my lap. You treated me like paperwork, Ethan. Fresh tears rolled down his face. I know. You tried to erase my independence while I was still alive? I know. Every answer came smaller now, because truth had finally stripped away every excuse. The room remained silent for a long time. Finally, Michael spoke carefully. Layla, no decisions need to be made today. But I already understood something important. Punishment alone would not heal this. Neither would pretending nothing happened, because some damage changes a family forever. I looked at my son one last time across that conference table, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I no longer saw a villain sitting there. I saw a frightened man who destroyed himself trying to avoid feeling like a failure, which somehow felt even more heartbreaking. After the meeting at Michael's office, Ethan's life unraveled faster than even he expected. Publicly, completely. And quietly, something inside me unraveled too. Not my strength, my illusion. The illusion that parents can always protect their children from themselves. 3 days after the family meeting, Ethan officially lost operational control of his company. Michael called me that morning while I sat in the Silver Pines garden, wrapped in a gray sweater, watching wind scatter orange leaves across the courtyard. The board forced him out, Michael said carefully. I closed my eyes briefly. How did he take it? He didn't argue. That surprised me. Old Ethan would have fought viciously to maintain appearances, but exhaustion changes people. Humiliation changes them even more. What happens now? The lenders are restructuring what's left, which really meant dismantling it. I understood business language well enough to know polite phrases often hide ugly realities. What about criminal charges? Michael paused. The investors want repayment first. Of course they did. Money always speaks before morality in business. After the call ended, I remained outside longer than usual. Silver Pines looked beautiful in autumn. Too beautiful for a place built around endings. Residents moved slowly through the walking paths, while nurses adjusted blankets and carried cups of tea. Life shrinking quietly into routines. I used to look at places like this with fear. Now, I looked at them differently. Not as prisons, as reminders. Aging strips away illusion, the same way storms strip leaves from trees. And sometimes what remains is painful clarity. Grace eventually joined me carrying 2 coffees. You've been out here an hour. I needed air. She sat beside me. How's Ethan? The question hurt more than I expected. Because despite everything, hearing his name still triggered instinct before reason. Motherhood does that to you. He lost the company. Grace winced softly. I'm sorry. Are you? She looked surprised. I stared ahead at the fountain. I keep waiting to feel victorious, I admitted quietly. But I don't. Grace nodded slowly. Because you never actually wanted revenge. No, I didn't. That was the truth nobody understood. Not Ethan, not Vanessa. Not even Michael sometimes. I never wanted my son destroyed. I just wanted him to stop destroying me. That afternoon, Vanessa called unexpectedly. Her voice sounded hollow. Ethan moved out. I sat upright immediately. What he left the house this morning. A strange ache moved through my chest. The house, my house, Richard's house, empty now except for ghosts and damage. Where did he go? A hotel for now? She hesitated. He didn't want me coming with him. Interesting. Not because Ethan stopped loving Vanessa. Because shame isolates people before loneliness even begins. Vanessa continued quietly. He barely talks anymore. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to harden completely against sympathy, but another part remembered holding Ethan through childhood fevers. You don't erase 42 years of motherhood just because trust dies. Is he drinking? I asked softly. A long silence followed. Yes, of course. People desperate to avoid pain usually choose numbness instead of honesty first. Vanessa sounded exhausted now, too. I think he hates himself. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended, because underneath all the anger and betrayal, I knew something terrible had happened to Ethan long before the nursing home. He stopped measuring his worth through character. He started measuring it through success. And once failure threatened that identity, morality became negotiable. That evening, Michael visited Silver Pines again, carrying updated legal paperwork. He looked tired, older somehow. This entire situation's been ugly, he admitted while sitting across from me in the lounge. Yes, the lenders are demanding complete financial disclosure now. I nodded silently, and Michael opened his briefcase slowly. Layla. Ethan personally guaranteed debts he had no realistic ability to repay. I frowned. How much total exposure are we talking about now? Closer to $7 million. The number physically stunned me. $7 million. My son wasn't merely reckless. He had been drowning for a very long time. How did nobody see this? I whispered. Michael looked at me carefully. Because Ethan became very good at performing success. That sentence cut deep. Because it described modern life perfectly. People don't chase stability anymore. They chase appearances of stability. Michael leaned back tiredly. There's more. Of course there was. Multiple former employees are cooperating with investigators now. I looked up sharply. Investigators. Yes. The word hung heavily between us. This may move beyond civil issues. Fraud investigations, financial misconduct, possibly criminal exposure. Everything was becoming terrifyingly real. And suddenly, for the first time since this began, genuine fear moved through me. Not fear for myself. Fear for Ethan. Because consequences are abstract until prison becomes a possibility. Michael studied my expression carefully. You still want to protect him. I laughed quietly through sudden tears. He's my son. Yes, Michael said softly. But he stopped protecting you a long time ago. That truth hurt because it was undeniable. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered quietly through Silver Pines until I found myself standing beside the large second-floor window overlooking the parking lot. The same place where I watched Ethan leave after abandoning me here. I remembered every detail. The taillights disappearing, The silence afterward, the feeling of becoming disposable. And suddenly, I realized something important. That moment changed both of us. Not just him, me too. Before Silver Pines, I spent years shrinking myself emotionally after Richard died, avoiding conflict, avoiding difficult truths, avoiding loneliness by pretending family closeness still existed. But grief has strange ways of exposing reality eventually. Around midnight, my phone rang. Ethan. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. His voice sounded rough. "I'm sorry for calling so late. It's okay." Long silence. Then quietly, I walked through the house tonight. Pain tightened inside my chest instantly. The house carried too many memories for both of us. I kept seeing Dad everywhere he whispered. I closed my eyes. Me too. All the walls feel different now. Because shame changes familiar places. "I found Mom's Day cards I made in 3rd grade," he continued softly. "You kept all of them." Tears filled my eyes immediately. Of course I kept them. Mothers keep everything. "I don't understand how I became this person," he whispered. The heartbreak in his voice sounded real this time. Not manipulative, not defensive, just lost. I leaned against the window quietly. "You became afraid." Silence. "Then Dad would hate me." "No," I answered softly. "He'd be heartbroken." That difference mattered. Because Richard loved Ethan deeply even when disappointed by him. Ethan began crying quietly on the phone then. Actual crying. Not dramatic, not performative. The kind people tried desperately to hide. "I ruined everything." I looked out across the dark parking lot below Silver Pines. "No," I whispered. "You revealed everything. And maybe that was worse. Because failure can be repaired. But truth changes people permanently." Ethan cried harder. "I don't know how to fix this." I swallowed painfully. "You may not be able to fix all of it." Silence. Then I said the hardest truth of all. "But you can still decide who you become after this." The line stayed quiet for a long time. Then finally, almost like a child again, Ethan whispered, "Do you still love me?" The question shattered something inside me completely. Because no matter what happened, no matter what he did, the answer would always be yes. And that was both the tragedy and the strength of being a mother. 2 weeks after Ethan lost the company, he came back to Silver Pines one last time. But this time, he didn't arrive angry. He arrived broken. I saw him through my window before he entered the building. No luxury SUV, no tailored suit, no polished image carefully constructed for the world. He stepped out of an old rental sedan wearing jeans, a wrinkled dark sweater, and exhaustion across his face. For a moment, I barely recognized him. Not physically, emotionally. The arrogance that once filled every movement was gone. All that remained was a man carrying the weight of finally seeing himself clearly. Grace knocked softly on my door a few minutes later. "He's asking for you." I nodded quietly. This time, there was no fear in me. No anger either. Only sadness. Deep, tired sadness. When Ethan entered my room, he stopped just inside the doorway, like he wasn't sure he deserved to come any closer. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then he looked around slowly at the small room. The bed. The dresser. The framed watercolor painting another resident had given me. Shame filled his eyes instantly. "You really lived here this whole time." The sentence came out barely above a whisper. "Yes." He swallowed hard. I kept telling myself it was temporary. I stayed silent, because temporary cruelty still leaves permanent scars. Ethan finally stepped farther inside and sat carefully in the chair near the window. For several seconds, he simply stared at his hands. Then he spoke. "I sold my watch yesterday. That surprised me. Not because of the watch, because Ethan used to love symbols of success. The expensive watches, the tailored suits, the luxury dinners, identity wrapped in appearance. What for? To pay part of the hotel bill." The honesty in his voice sounded painfully unfamiliar. No excuses, no performance, no manipulation. Just truth. Outside the window, pale winter sunlight drifted across the courtyard, where a few residents sat wrapped in blankets. The seasons had changed while my family collapsed. Ethan rubbed his hands together nervously. Vanessa moved in with her sister. I nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." He laughed quietly at that. She should have left sooner. The bitterness wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at himself. Silence settled between us again. Then Ethan finally looked at me directly. "I need to say something, and I need you not to stop me." I waited quietly. His voice shook slightly. "I spent months convincing myself you were standing in the way of my survival." Pain tightened in my chest immediately. "But the truth is..." He swallowed hard. I was terrified. There it was again. Fear. Always fear underneath everything. "I couldn't handle failing," he whispered. "Not after Dad built so much. Not after everyone expected me to succeed." I remembered something Richard once told me late one night after Ethan graduated college. He thinks achievement earns love. At the time, I thought Richard worried too much. Now I understood exactly what he meant. Ethan continued quietly. "Every time a project failed, I felt smaller." His eyes filled with tears. And instead of admitting that, I started lying, not just to investors, to himself. That first loan felt temporary, he admitted. Then another deal collapsed, so I borrowed more. After a while, I stopped thinking clearly. No, not stopped thinking clearly, stopped thinking honestly. There was always another excuse, he whispered. Another justification. I sat silently listening to my son dismantle himself, one truth at a time. And strangely enough, this conversation hurt more than the lies ever did, because honesty removes distance. Now I could finally see the frightened human being beneath the betrayal. Ethan looked down at the floor. When Vanessa suggested assisted living, I didn't say no. I closed my eyes briefly, because it solved a problem. Yes. The answer came instantly. No excuses now, only accountability. Fresh tears slid down his face. I hate myself for that. Part of me wanted to comfort him automatically. That instinct never fully leaves mothers. But another part of me finally understood something important. Comfort without accountability creates weak people. So instead, I asked quietly, "What exactly are you sorry for?" The question visibly shook him. Because general apologies are easy. Specific truth is harder. Ethan breathed unevenly. "I'm sorry for making you feel disposable." The room went still. "I'm sorry for treating your life like paperwork." Tears rolled down his face openly now. "And I'm sorry for making you afraid of your own son." That last sentence broke something inside me, because he finally understood. Not just the financial damage, the emotional terror. The moment I realized my own child viewed me as an obstacle instead of a mother. Ethan wiped at his face roughly. "I don't expect forgiveness." Good, because forgiveness isn't a transaction. It's a process, and sometimes it arrives slowly. I looked out the window for a long moment before speaking. "When your father died," I whispered, "I thought losing him would be the hardest pain I'd ever survive." Ethan remained silent. But watching you become someone unrecognizable? My voice cracked slightly. That nearly destroyed me. His shoulders collapsed completely. I know. No, I answered softly. I don't think you did. Not until now. Silence stretched between us again. Then Ethan asked quietly, "Are you pressing charges?" The question lingered heavily in the room. I answered honestly, "I haven't decided." Fear flashed across his face immediately. Not panic this time, acceptance. Like he already believed he deserved whatever happened next. "I'll cooperate if you do," he whispered. That surprised me. "You would?" He nodded weakly. "I'm tired of lying." The sentence sounded simple, but I realized how monumental it actually was. Because people like Ethan spend years constructing identities designed to avoid shame. Tearing that apart takes courage or total collapse. Maybe both. I studied my son carefully. The expensive confidence was gone now. In its place sat a man stripped down to truth. Flawed, ashamed, human. Finally, I asked the question sitting inside me for weeks. If I had died before discovering any of this, would you have stopped? Ethan froze instantly. Real horror crossed his face. Then he whispered, "I don't know." Oddly enough, that answer gave me more peace than any lie could have, because at least it was honest. Tears burned behind my eyes. "I appreciate the truth." He nodded slowly. Then he said something I never expected. "You don't have to take care of me anymore." The sentence nearly shattered me. Because for the first time in his life, Ethan finally understood something essential. Love and rescue are not the same thing. I reached for his hand carefully. Not because everything was healed, not because trust magically returned, but because despite everything, he was still my son. And sometimes healing begins not with forgiveness, but with truth finally sitting openly between two people. Ethan gripped my hand tightly and cried silently. Not like a businessman losing money, like a child mourning the person he became. After a long time, he stood slowly near the door. "I'm getting a small apartment next week," he said quietly. "Nothing fancy." I nodded. "I found temporary accounting work too." "That's good." Another silence. Then Ethan looked around the room one last time. "You know what scares me most? What, that you survived all this stronger than I did." I almost smiled sadly. "No, Ethan." I looked directly into his eyes. "I survived because life taught me long ago that losing everything external is survivable." He frowned slightly. "But losing your character?" I whispered. "That's the real bankruptcy." Tears filled his eyes again. And as my son quietly walked out of my room at Silver Pines, I realized this was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. I left Silver Pines on a cold Thursday morning in early December. Grace hugged me tightly before I walked out the front doors. "You sure you don't want me to come help unpack?" she asked. I smiled warmly. I've had enough of people thinking I can't manage my own life. That made her laugh for the first time in days. Still, her eyes filled with tears. Mine did too, because strange things happen during painful seasons of life. Sometimes the people who show you the most humanity are strangers. And sometimes the people you trust most become strangers themselves. Michael loaded my suitcase into his car while snow drifted softly across the Silver Pines parking lot, the same parking lot where Ethan once drove away believing he had won. Now everything felt different. Not fixed. Different. As we drove through downtown Chicago, I watched familiar streets pass outside the window, while memories moved quietly through me. The first Christmas after Richard and I got married, taking Ethan to his first Cubs game, late-night business meetings, family dinners, birthday cakes, arguments, love, loss, a lifetime folded into one city. Michael glanced toward me carefully while driving. You nervous? Yes. About Ethan, no. I looked out the window quietly. About going home, because home changes after betrayal. Even when the walls stay the same. When we finally pulled into the driveway, my breath caught painfully in my chest. The house stood exactly as I remembered. Tall maple tree in the front yard. Stone walkway Richard built himself one summer. White shutters slightly faded from age, but something still felt unfamiliar. Not because the house changed, because I had. Michael carried my suitcase inside while I stood silently in the entryway. The air smelled faintly like old wood and winter dust. Home, but not untouched. The framed family photos still lined the hallway walls, though several sat crooked now. Vanessa probably moved them while redecorating. I slowly straightened one picture of Ethan at graduation. My fingers lingered on the glass. Michael watched quietly from the living room. You okay? I nodded slowly. Yes, and surprisingly, I was telling the truth. Not because the pain disappeared, because I no longer felt powerless inside it. Over the next several days, I reclaimed the house piece by piece. I changed the locks, updated legal paperwork, reviewed every financial account carefully with Michael. But I also did something unexpected. I opened all the curtains again. For weeks after Richard died, I kept parts of the house dark because sunlight made the emptiness feel sharper somehow. Now, after everything with Ethan, I suddenly wanted light everywhere. Maybe survival changes your relationship with darkness. Grace visited often during that first week home. We drank tea in the kitchen while snow fell softly outside. You know, she said one afternoon, most people would have sold the house after everything. I looked around the kitchen slowly. Richard's favorite coffee mug still sat near the stove. The old clock still ticked above the pantry. This house survived worse than betrayal, I answered quietly. She smiled. And so did you. A few days later, Ethan came by for the first time since I returned home. He stood awkwardly on the front porch, carrying nothing except a paper grocery bag. No polished image, no expensive coat, just humility. When I opened the door, he looked almost nervous. I brought groceries. I glanced inside the bag. Soup, bread, tea. Simple things, thoughtful things. Not because he was trying to impress me anymore, because he was finally paying attention. That's sweet, I said softly. Ethan stepped inside slowly, like he still wasn't sure he belonged there. Maybe he didn't. Not yet, but healing takes time. We sat together in the kitchen drinking tea while snow covered the backyard outside. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then, Ethan quietly said, I started therapy. That surprised me. How's that going? He laughed weakly. Painful? Yes, I said softly. Growth usually is. He nodded slowly. I spent years believing success would finally make me feel enough. The honesty in his voice still sounded new, fragile. I think Dad scared me more than I admitted. I looked at him carefully. Your father loved you. I know. No, I said gently. You knew he expected more from you. That's different. Tears filled Ethan's eyes instantly. Because children often confuse disappointment with lack of love. Richard challenged Ethan because he saw potential in him. But Ethan spent years translating pressure into shame. I kept trying to become somebody impressive, he whispered, and his laugh cracked painfully. I stopped becoming somebody good. the truth of that settled quietly between us. Not cruelly, honestly. After Ethan left that evening, I walked slowly through the house alone. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. Not because life became perfect, because I finally understood something important. Survival is not about avoiding pain. It's about refusing to disappear inside it. A month later, Michael helped me establish a small nonprofit foundation dedicated to helping elderly people facing financial abuse from family members. Grace volunteered immediately. So did several former Silver Pines employees. I called it the Richard Thompson Trust Project. Because despite everything, Richard's foresight protected me when love alone could not. One afternoon during our first community workshop, an elderly woman quietly pulled me aside after the presentation. "My son controls all my accounts," she whispered tearfully. "I don't know what to do." I took her hands gently, and suddenly I understood why I survived all of this. Not just for myself. For women like her, for people taught their age makes them powerless. It doesn't. Weeks later, Ethan found a small accounting position with a local firm, willing to give him another chance. Not because of my influence, because for once, he stopped pretending to be bigger than he was. Sometimes rebuilding begins with humility. He still visited every Sunday. Not perfectly, not comfortably. Trust rebuilds slower than love. But he showed up consistently now, and consistency matters. One snowy evening before Christmas, Ethan stood beside me in the backyard watching lights glow softly through the neighborhood. "I used to think losing everything would kill me," he admitted quietly. I looked at him carefully. "But it didn't," I said. "No." He swallowed hard. "Because I finally realized I already lost the most important parts long before the money disappeared." I reached for his hand gently. Not because everything was healed, but because healing had finally begun, honestly. And sometimes that's enough. Before all of this happened, I believed the worst thing a mother could experience was losing her child. I was wrong. The worst thing is watching your child lose themselves while you stand helplessly nearby. But there's something even stronger than heartbreak. Truth. Truth strips away illusion. Truth forces accountability. Truth gives people one final chance to become someone better. My son put me in a nursing home because he believed I was standing between him and survival. But 3 days later, he lost everything he thought mattered. The company, the money, the image, the control, and only after losing all of it did he finally begin finding himself again. Sometimes the people we love most hurt us in ways strangers never could. Not because love is weak, but because trust gives people access to the softest parts of our hearts. For a long time, I believed being a good mother meant sacrificing endlessly, staying quiet, protecting your children from consequences, excusing behavior because family is family. But I learned something painful and powerful through all of this. Love without boundaries eventually becomes permission. Getting older does not make you less valuable. It does not make your voice smaller. And it certainly does not mean your life belongs to someone else simply because they are younger, louder, or stronger. Too many elderly parents are treated like burdens instead of human beings who spent decades sacrificing for their families. Too many women disappear quietly inside guilt, loneliness, or fear of confrontation. Please don't. Your kindness should never require your surrender. And if someone truly loves you, they will never need to erase your independence in order to feel secure themselves. As for Ethan, I forgave him slowly. Not because what he did was acceptable, but because bitterness would have imprisoned both of us forever. Forgiveness does not erase accountability. It simply allows healing to begin where destruction once lived. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you deeply loved? Or have you ever had to rebuild trust after losing it? I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Your stories remind all of us that we're never truly alone. And if you believe stories like this matter, please like and subscribe so we can continue sharing journeys of heartbreak, healing, and hope together.